Nearly 2 years after Matt Lauer was fired from Today, disturbing new details about his alleged behavior began surfacing publicly. The woman whose accusations helped end his career decided to speak openly, bringing renewed attention to a scandal that had already shocked the media industry. On November 29, 2017, America woke up to stunning news. Lauer had been fired from the morning program immediately after NBC received a complaint about inappropriate sexual behavior. The announcement itself was only a few lines long, yet the consequences were enormous. A man who had spent more than 2 decades greeting millions of viewers every morning suddenly vanished from television within hours. There was no farewell broadcast, no emotional goodbye, and no lengthy explanation. A career that had stretched nearly 30 years collapsed almost instantly. At the height of his influence, Lauer had been one of the most recognizable faces in American media. Known for his calm presence and measured interviewing style, he had spoken with presidents, Hollywood stars, and ordinary people caught in national tragedies. He represented stability and trust for millions of viewers starting their day. Reputation helped transform him into one of the highest-paid hosts in television news. Yet behind the familiar anchor desk, a far more complicated story was developing. Allegations began emerging, followed by behind-the-scenes accounts that forced the public to reconsider the image they had trusted for years. The man who once asked the questions of others suddenly became the subject of the biggest questions facing American television. To understand why the collapse was so shocking, it helps to go back to the beginning of Lauer's life, long before the studio lights and national broadcasts. Matthew Todd Lauer was born on December 30, 1957, in New York City, and grew up on Long Island. His father, J. Robert Lauer, worked in bicycle manufacturing in Manhattan, while his mother, Marilyn Lauer, owned a small clothing shop. Their household reflected a practical middle-class environment shaped by steady work rather than ambition for fame. Television was already becoming a central part of American family life during the late 1960s and early 1970s. And like many teenagers of that era, Lauer watched national news anchors who seemed to speak directly to the country each evening. Friends from his youth often described him as someone who blended easily into different groups rather than dominating attention. He was observant and calm, traits that would later become valuable in television. After high school, he enrolled at Ohio University in the late 1970s, initially studying communications. During that time, he began working at the university's television station WUBT-TV. His early tasks were behind the scenes, helping with production equipment and learning how control rooms functioned during live broadcasts. Those hours inside the studio became a practical education that shaped his understanding of television far more than classroom lectures. The experience convinced him to pursue broadcasting professionally. Lauer eventually left the university before finishing his degree and began working for small television stations. The early years were far from glamorous. Local stations operated with limited budgets, meaning reporters often had to perform multiple roles writing scripts, conducting interviews, filming footage, and sometimes assisting with editing. These small markets gave him the chance to develop a calm delivery style and the ability to handle live broadcasts without visible hesitation. Over time, he moved through larger markets, gradually building a reputation that brought him back to New York in the early 1990s. In 1992, he joined WNBC, where he hosted Today in New York, the local version of NBC's well-known morning program. At first, he was not the main personality on the show, but his reliability quickly impressed network executives. In the world of live television, a host who can maintain stability and avoid mistakes is extremely valuable. Lauer began filling in for absent anchors and handling increasingly important interviews. On January 6, 1997, he officially became co-anchor of Today. The role carried enormous influence. Morning television attracted millions of viewers each day and generated massive advertising revenue for networks. During the late 1990s and early 2000s, the program regularly averaged around 6 million viewers weekly and often outperformed its rival, Good Morning America, by over 1 million viewers. Those ratings translated into tens of millions of dollars in advertising revenue for NBC. Lauer's influence grew as the program maintained its dominance for years. He interviewed major political leaders, including Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama. His calm interviewing style avoided dramatic confrontation, but kept conversations steady and accessible for morning audiences. He also hosted the investigative program Dateline NBC, giving him a presence in both light morning television and serious investigative reporting. His role reached a particularly visible moment during the 2016 presidential campaign when he moderated a forum featuring Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. The broadcast drew intense attention, with critics later debating how he handled the questioning of each candidate. The level of scrutiny demonstrated the influence he held within American media. For many years, Lauer also maintained extremely high audience approval ratings, known in television as Q ratings. Networks use these ratings to measure how much viewers trust and like a personality. High ratings allowed NBC to charge higher advertising prices during the show. By the late 2000s, Lauer's salary was estimated at around $20 to $25 million per year, reflecting his central role in maintaining one of the network's most profitable programs. Yet the power associated with that position also created a complicated internal environment. In large media organizations, individuals tied closely to ratings and revenue can gain enormous influence. When one person becomes essential to a program's success, colleagues and managers may hesitate to challenge them. This dynamic later became part of the discussion surrounding Lauer's downfall. The turning point in the public narrative centered on an alleged incident during the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi. Details emerged years later through investigative reporting and the book Catch and Kill by journalist Ronan Farrow, according to former NBC employee Brooke Nevils. The encounter began after an evening of socializing among NBC staff members during the Olympic coverage. She said she went to Lauer's hotel room initially to retrieve her press credential, which he had taken as a joke. Later that night, she returned at his invitation. In her account, the encounter that followed became non-consensual. Neville stated that she repeatedly said no and felt she was too intoxicated to give meaningful consent. She later described the event as deeply confusing and painful. Lauer has strongly denied that characterization, saying the encounter was entirely consensual and that Nevils never indicated objection. The conflicting accounts became central to the controversy that followed. When NBC received a formal complaint in November 2017, the network responded immediately. Within less than 24 hours, Lauer's contract was terminated. The announcement was read live on air by Savannah Guthrie, one of his colleagues on the program. Alongside Hoda Khattab, both expressed shock and sadness as they addressed viewers. The decision occurred during the height of the global #MeToo movement, which had begun spreading rapidly through media, entertainment, and politics after allegations against Harvey Weinstein. At that moment, many companies faced intense pressure to respond quickly to accusations of workplace misconduct. NBC's swift dismissal signaled a major shift in how organizations handled such allegations. After leaving NBC, Lauer largely disappeared from public life. He issued written statements denying certain accusations, but avoided major television interviews or attempts to rebuild his media career publicly. Meanwhile, his personal life also changed. His wife, Annette Roque, eventually finalized a divorce from him in 2019 after more than 2 decades of marriage. The settlement reportedly included significant financial assets and arrangements related to their 3 children. In the years since, Lauer has lived a relatively private life, spending time in the Hamptons and occasionally traveling to New Zealand, where he once owned property. He has been linked romantically to public relations professional Shayman Abbas, though their relationship has remained largely outside the spotlight. Unlike many public figures who attempt dramatic comebacks after controversy, Lauer has mostly stayed away from television. His story continues to be discussed as part of a larger moment in media history. For more than 20 years, he represented the calm face of American morning television, helping shape the format that blended hard news, celebrity interviews, and lifestyle segments. Yet his sudden fall also became one of the most visible examples of how the #MeToo movement forced major media organizations to confront power structures within their own workplaces. Media system can elevate individuals into national symbols, turning them into trusted voices that millions of viewers welcome into their homes every morning. But that same system can remove those figures just as quickly when a crisis emerges. The rise and fall of Matt Lauer illustrates both sides of that. Reality: how influence is built over decades, and how it can disappear in a single morning broadcast. In the years following his dismissal from Today, the public conversation surrounding Matt Lauer did not disappear entirely. Instead, it resurfaced periodically whenever new information, interviews, or publications revisited the events that led to his fall from one of the most powerful positions in American television. Each time the story returned to headlines, it reminded audiences how abruptly one of the most familiar figures in morning broadcasting had vanished. After leaving NBC in 2017, Lauer avoided the traditional media path that many public figures choose. After controversy, there was no major television interview, no documentary appearance, and no extended media tour to present his side of the story directly to the public. Instead, his responses appeared primarily in written statements released through representatives or shared with journalists. In those statements, he consistently rejected the most serious accusations against him and argued that certain events had been misinterpreted or presented without full context. When Ronan Farrow published his investigative book Catch and Kill in 2019, the discussions surrounding Lauer intensified once again. The book included the detailed account from Brooke Nevils about the alleged encounter. During the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi, Nevils described the experience as traumatic and non-consensual, stating that she had repeatedly refused Lauer's advances during the incident. She explained that the power imbalance between them within the NBC environment made it extremely difficult for her to speak out immediately afterward. Lauer responded strongly to those claims in a lengthy open letter. In his response, he denied that the encounter had been forced and insisted that the relationship had been consensual. He wrote that the two had continued communicating afterward and even had additional intimate encounters, something he believed contradicted the characterization of the event as assault. According to his account, the story that emerged years later did not reflect the reality. He remembered, these two entirely different versions of the same event became the central conflict surrounding the scandal. For many observers, the case symbolized the broader conversation that emerged during the #MeToo movement about workplace power dynamics. The discussion was no longer limited to a single incident. It expanded into a larger examination of how authority, influence, and career dependence can affect personal relationships inside large organizations. While these debates continued publicly, Lauer's personal life moved in a quieter direction. After his divorce from Annette Roque was finalized in 2019, he spent most of his time away from major media centers. Reports from American outlets often described him living between properties. In the Hamptons and New Zealand, the New Zealand connection came from land he had once leased there for agricultural use, a large rural property that offered distance from the intense media attention surrounding his name in the United States. Friends and acquaintances, occasionally, described him as someone trying to adjust to a life very different from the one he had lived for decades. For more than 20 years, his daily routine had been tied to the early morning broadcast schedule of Today. The program required him to appear live before millions of viewers nearly every weekday morning. Losing that routine meant not only the end of a career, but also the disappearance of the structure that had defined his daily life. During this period, he also began a relationship with Shaman Abbas, a public relations executive known for working with luxury brands and high-profile clients. The relationship remained relatively private compared with the visibility that once surrounded his family life during his television career. Their appearances together were mostly captured by photographers during trips or social gatherings rather than through official media coverage. Occasionally, small public sightings would generate headlines simply because Lauer had become so rarely seen. One example occurred when he attended the wedding of former television host Don Lemon in New York. Even though the appearance was purely social, it attracted attention because it was one of the few moments in which he appeared publicly alongside other figures connected to the media industry over time. Some reports suggested that Lauer had gradually reconnected with a limited number of former colleagues or friends from the television world. However, there was no indication that he had returned to professional broadcasting or accepted a new role in media. Sources quoted by publications such as People magazine described him as living comfortably from the wealth he accumulated during his decades at NBC. Without actively seeking a new career, financially his situation remained stable. During his peak years, his annual salary at NBC had been estimated at around $20 to $25 million, and he had accumulated substantial assets through property and investments. This meant that although his professional reputation suffered dramatic damage, his material lifestyle did not collapse in the same way his television presence did. The story also continued influencing the broader media industry. The firing of Lauer became one of the most prominent examples, cited in discussions about workplace conduct and accountability within journalism. News organizations began reevaluating internal reporting systems, human resources policies, and the balance of power between high-profile talent and other employees. Before 2017, figures like Lauer often held enormous informal influence inside media companies. Their presence helped generate ratings, attract advertisers, and maintain the public identity of major programs. Because of that influence, confronting misconduct allegations against such figures could involve serious financial risks for networks. The cultural shift triggered by the #MeToo movement altered that calculation. Suddenly, the reputational risk of ignoring complaints became greater than the risk of removing even the most valuable on-air personalities. Lauer's rise and fall, therefore, became a case study within journalism schools and media analysis. For more than 2 decades, he had embodied the success of modern morning television, a format that combined political interviews, celebrity appearances, lifestyle segments, and breaking news within the same broadcast. That structure later became the model for many competing morning programs. When he sat at the anchor desk of Today each morning, millions of viewers experienced the program as a familiar ritual. It was designed to feel welcoming and stable, something people could watch while preparing for work or school. Lauer's calm delivery style fit perfectly within that atmosphere. He could transition from a serious political conversation to a light entertainment interview without creating an uncomfortable shift in tone. Yet the sudden collapse of his career showed how fragile media reputations can be. For years, his image had been carefully built through thousands of hours of live broadcasting. The audience saw a composed interviewer who rarely displayed strong emotion or controversy on air. When allegations appeared that contradicted that image, the contrast made the story even more dramatic. Today, years after his dismissal, the discussion about Matt Lauer still appears from time to time in articles examining the transformation of the media industry. His story sits at the intersection of several major themes: the influence of television personalities, the financial structures behind major broadcast programs, and the growing awareness of workplace power dynamics within large organizations. The morning broadcasts that once revolved around him continue without his presence. New hosts now guide the program. The media landscape has continued evolving, with digital platforms and streaming services reshaping how audiences consume news. But the events surrounding his dismissal remain a defining moment in the history of modern television journalism. For viewers who watched him for decades, the story serves as a reminder that public images can hide complicated realities behind the scenes. Television personalities often appear as familiar companions in people's daily routines, yet their lives and workplaces exist within complex systems of power, ambition, and pressure that the audience rarely sees. The rise and fall of Matt Lauer. Therefore, it represents more than the story of a single television host. It reflects how institutions respond to crises, how public trust can shift dramatically, and how the media industry continues to change as it confronts questions about accountability and influence.